So tonight I'm going to be talking to you about the future and the fact that the future is whatever we want it to be. There are multiple infinite versions of the future that we could be stepping into. Some of those are more probable and some of those are more preferable. And it's the challenge to all of us here tonight to make sure that we help direct ourselves, our families, our businesses, and our societies at large to the future that we actually want to live in one day. And that's why the story of the future is really a story about ethics and the compromises that we make along the way. If you are familiar with science fiction and looking ahead to the future, I'm sure you would have read George Orwell's book, 1984. So this is a picture of China actually in 1984. Very communist, very dystopian. Fast forward another few years, and here we are today at a new type of digital dictatorship, which is basically what China is busy building at the moment. They're building this through a process of what they call social credit scores. These scores are a combination of all the data that the government is able to gather on their citizens, covering everything from credit card data and financial data, all the way through to the kind of things that you buy online. So for example, your score could be reduced if you spend too much time looking at dirty pictures online, or if you maybe bought some video games when you should have been buying improving books, or if you just speak out against the government on social media. So this credit score system at the moment is still in the beta testing phase, but it's going to come on board and be compulsory very, very soon. But the question is, where are they getting all that data from? Well, for a start, they're getting it from what we call the super apps. That would be specifically WeChat and Alipay, both of which are now financial apps, but they also collect data and do things like social transactions, like chatting. I'm sure many of you have used WeChat at some point in time. How many people exactly are using these apps? Between the two of them, 1 in every 7 people on the planet is actually connected to one of these super apps. And the thing with these apps is you never have to leave them. You can transact everything from ordering your Uber, to buying your groceries, to chatting with your friends. All that data is collected and consolidated about that person into what can become a score. So Sesame Credit is Alipay's version of this credit score, but these companies are now sharing that data with the government because they kind of have to in order to do business in those locations. But don't think that we are safe here in the West. I'm sure you've all seen, or some of you might have seen, the Black Mirror episode Nosedive, which is very much about a social credit score, but more of a free market credit score that is being determined by our interactions with each other, a score that we enforce upon each other's lives. Specifically, the companies that are collecting this data on us that could be used to control us sometime in the future would be what we call the FANGs, which is just a fun acronym for Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And these are the Western big tech companies that have immense power because of the data that they have over our lives. Now, the thing to realize here is they're not necessarily just the bad guys. We are complicit in these transactions. Much like vampires in popular fiction, you have to invite them in over the threshold before they can get their claws into you. The challenge is, though, we're not necessarily having informed consent about what we're doing when we're giving up some of our freedom and some of our privacy in exchange for free stuff. We have not asked the correct questions to find out what actually happens. So I'm using Facebook for free. It's a great communication tool. But what am I giving up in exchange for that convenience? Or in the case of looking ahead to actually wanting to collect more data from a government perspective, what are we giving up in terms of freedom in exchange for a bit of privacy? So there are a lot of trade-offs we need to be asking questions about, both as businesses that control this data and as consumers. This cartoon really does sum it up, because where we're really going here is getting to a point where governments are going to start relying more and more on private sector, really powerful companies to help them run their countries. Now, this can be for good, as in the case of Uber. I know there was a talk about Uber here at TV Chef not too long ago. And Uber is sharing its rider pattern data with city planners to help create more efficient road networks. That's great. And Google is also looking at building smart cities. You might have heard of Sidewalk Labs. This is Google or Alphabet's smart city company. And they're building a fantastic smart city in Toronto. This could be a utopian dream. And I know Singularity University is quite keen about the fact that all data can be collected and shared amongst everyone democratically. So everyone can know everything about what's going on in everyone else's lives. But that utopian vision might not be your utopia. And the other question we have to ask is, As we start outsourcing the control of our communities and individuals to private companies, are we not possibly looking at just a new age version of, say, the Dutch East India Company, or privatized control over populations, much like what happened with colonization? So they've been said that the term digital natives is not without irony in such a context. But this goes both ways. There's also a breakdown, the separation of church, state, and brand. What we're seeing is that as much as brands are wanting, or big businesses are wanting to get involved with managing societies, at the same time, they're being managed by societies themselves in terms of the kind of discourses we're having. Brands are having to start to take stands on social and moral issues. These would be the trends that we term such as brand activism. So brands can't sit on the sidelines anymore, they have to get involved in these issues. But the next evolution of this trend is what we call morality marketing. This is where marketers start appointing themselves as judge, jury, priest, and executioner over the social conversation. A great example here would be that of Lazio and Chelsea, the football clubs, who are now insisting that fans who are caught engaging in anti-Semitic behavior will get to go on a compulsory club-mandated tour of Auschwitz to learn to atone for their sins. So this is really a new step in the line of how brands start interacting with societies. Now, this can get quite interesting. So this is another example. In New York City, there are a few restaurants now who are refusing entry to patrons who are caught wearing one of these wonderful fashion statement hats. This could be quite amusing, depending on your political views, but it can also be quite scary, because can you imagine in a South African context, if someone wearing a DA or an EFF t-shirt was denied access into a club or a pub? That would be destructive for society, wouldn't it? And do we really want brands to start making those discriminatory choices based on people's morals, religions, and political views? This goes even further when you get to your really big tech companies like Facebook and Twitter, who are starting to actually censor what we say to each other. Like in the moment, on Twitter's newest update in terms of their terms and conditions, you will see that it is now considered hate speech for Twitter if you can just tweet out something as simple as saying, men are not women. So they've made a choice there to say that sort of debate is now censored. So it's up to you whether you agree with that censorship or not, but it should be a concerned view with the amount of power these companies have over what we're saying to each other. They also have more subtle power in terms of echo chambers and reinforcement. The algorithms that you interact with on social media feeds are designed to keep you clicking. They're also designed to get you into a trap of getting ever more confrontational. So they've done studies on YouTube. If you, say, watch a political video that might have a slightly conservative bent, within just a couple of hours, they can get you to be watching really extreme right-wing content. So it's about this escalation and reinforcement of your biases that's going on, not always with your knowledge. At the same time, these sort of forces are coming up with what we call social cooling. Social cooling is the self-censorship that we impose upon ourselves in order to fit in with where the current Overton window is. Now, the Overton window is basically the narrowing field of reference that is socially acceptable to everyone on all sides of the political divide. So you can imagine this. As social media becomes more polarizing, the things that we all agree on, things like rain is kind of nice sometimes, become less and less and less. And in terms of modifying behavior, we also get brand-mandated nudge marketing. This is another trend that we've picked up with. It should be familiar to most of you in the room if you've interacted with Discovery. They're basically using behavioral economics techniques, which are designed to tap into the loopholes in our subconscious to get us to behave or change our behavior in certain ways. Now, this can also be used not necessarily for great things when you start thinking of things like social media and video games that are designed specifically to keep us addicted, which can be quite unhealthy. It's also worth considering that not so long ago you needed a court order before you could slap a security monitor onto someone's wrist or ankle, and now we go out and pay for these things ourselves in terms of our Fitbits. Just worth bearing in mind. And in terms of inviting potentially the enemy or our future masters into our homes, this illustration is just great. It shows an Alexa or Google Home type device that is now really becoming a part of our families. This device is with us all the time. Children have relationships with them. They share jokes with these things. And they're becoming ubiquitous in our lives, always listening and picking up on more and more cues. If you have one of these devices today, if you walk through your house wearing a shirt branded with a band slogan, Amazon can start serving you ads for that band's music within a matter of minutes. So it really is just really picking up everything that we say and do and think. And this is leading to an age of what we call unconscious consumerism, whereby these devices are soon going to know so much about us that it's going to be more within Amazon's interest, for example, to just send you a box of goods at the end of every month because they know exactly what you need. The cost of returns will be less than the cost of sales and marketing. Now, if you own a business, if you work in marketing, this is quite scary because where does that leave branding or advertising if you're selling to algorithms? And as we outsource more and more of our decisions to these machines, who very often will actually make better decisions than we do about certain things in our lives, it's really going to change the way that societies work. Of course, there are some negatives here once again. Digital discrimination is one thing to be aware of. This is a 23andMe DNA test kit. But if you go back to, say, the medical insurance industry, we are soon going to get to a point where a medical insurer will insist that you go through one of these tests before they agree to insure you. Now, that for me becomes slightly problematic because that's like discriminating on someone based on their skin color or their gender. It's something that they can't control, unlike the branded biohacking with the way that Discovery insists upon you going to the gym. That's something that you still have control over in your behavior. So that's going to be an issue as we go forward. As is this thing about weapons of mass destruction. This is a term coined by an American author who was a data scientist with Google for a long while. And she's concerned that all this data that's being collected is being compiled into algorithms that make decisions about us, but we don't know how those algorithms work. So a great example would be how, say, you go to a bank and you try to get a bank loan and you're denied, but you don't know why you've been denied. And it turns out that some algorithms picked up that people with the name of Sarah, for example, tend to default on loans more than people who aren't called Sarah. This isn't your fault. Just because your name is Sarah doesn't mean you're a bad payer, but big data doesn't work like that. Probability is not very good at judging individuals. Probability is also very good at automating inefficiencies or biases if they do exist. What we've really got is a case of what you see is not what you get. There's a play going on in New York at the moment. It's called the Privacy Play. And in this play, they get everyone to pull out their phones and go look at a particular Airbnb listing. People are shocked at how different the pricing is for each individual. If we had more time, we could do that here, but it's worth doing with your friends when you get back home. The point is that I'm really trying to get to today is that all this is very tempting. If you are a big business, why wouldn't you want to automate these things? Why wouldn't you want to extract as much value as you can from your audience? Why wouldn't you, if you're Google, want to capitulate to China's censorship laws or to sharing consumer data with the government in order to get access to that market? It's very tempting. But unfortunately, in a world where companies' lifespans are shrinking, I mean, the half-life of a Fortune 500 company is under 10 years now. Do you really want to go for that low-lying fruit and sell out your consumers for short-term gains? Or do you want to take the high road and build a relationship based on mutual values, trust, and respect that might see your company around for a little bit longer? So to end with, on a slightly more positive note, some things that people are doing in order to mitigate these things are looking at putting rights and responsibilities onto robots. This does not mean turning robots into persons. Rather, it means actually listing robots and algorithms as corporations would be, as a legal entity and a person. That would be great, but it does mean that the FANGs would get to write a lot of their own rules because nobody knows how these things work. They're really leading the conversation in terms of legislation. The other thing that I'd quite like is that of certifying clean bots. Now, Princeton University has a program called the WebTap Project, and what that will do is it will check out your algorithm to see if it contains biases or not. And it'll tell you your bot is biased against Latino men between the ages of 23 and 25. So what we are seeing is that these sort of certifications could be used to certify your tech as being clean or unbiased, not detrimental to your privacy, in much the same way that a fair trade or organic label can be slapped onto your cereal box. And the last tip would be that of what we call a black mirror audit. This would mean sitting down with your team and saying, in a dystopian world, what could go wrong with this? How could this end up really badly? And when you start to ask those questions about those hypothetical futures, you can try to navigate to the one that you want. So the point is, with great data comes great responsibility. I hope I've given you some food for thought. Thank you.